everyone, this is Graham, and this is the 6th of our little slide packs to accompany the CIPD Level 7 course on business skills. This week the subject is aspects of identity. In the last session we looked at the concept of self, the ability of a human being, and a bonobo by the way, to be self-aware and then use an awareness of ourselves to anticipate the feelings and behaviours of other people. We looked at our psyche using a simple self-regulating model that was first proposed by Freud, which consists of the id, the ego and the superego. And in this model the id is the source of all of our drives, and Freud felt that these fundamentally revolved around sex and to a degree power. Drawing on our sense of right and wrong imparted to us by our primary carers, the superego provides benchmarks of acceptable and unacceptable thoughts and behaviour. And then the ego itself tries to act as the moderator between the id and the superego. To do so it uses a range of defence mechanisms or coping strategies, and it's many of these that give us our characteristic individual behaviour. When these are ineffective, we can suffer from anxiety, melancholy or depression. More severe mental health conditions are also explained in terms of a breakdown in our sense of self. I explained last week that whereas Freud attributed much to our sexual urges, Carl Jung allows for a few more: inherited, spiritual and cultural influences. We're going to explore these a little bit more this week. Going beyond self and building on our personality, our identity is a reflection of various components that we have more control over. These are our norms, our values and our emotions, and they can be enhanced by knowledge and skills, though to a much lesser extent. Fundamentally, we have a lot of control over our identity, especially our professional identity. We can both control it and we can control the way that we display it in certain circles. It determines a lot of our social contacts and social networks, both at work and elsewhere. And in including this chapter within the Level 7 award, I think that the CIPD are really making a plea to you. It's your professional identity, far more than specific knowledge or skills, that's going to determine how successful you are in your careers. Professional identity simply can't be left to chance. You need to manage it, you need to cultivate it, and you need to let other people see it. We've all come across personality instruments, which is the psychologist's jargon for tests. The vast majority of these are based on one aspect of Carl Jung's work in analytical psychology. It's called the theory of types. The clue is in their use of the numbers 8 or 16. If the test mentions one of these in its title, then it will almost certainly be based on Jung's work. Psychologists are quite protective of their instruments. Firstly, they know that it's really easy to distort the results. Secondly, they know that most people have an image in their mind's eye of what the right outcome should be, and that they will get terribly upset if they don't actually get that result. And finally, the publishers want to protect their income stream. Therefore, many of the tests have their administration quite tightly and expensively controlled. A lot hangs on the results of these tests. People's promotion chances, their career opportunities, and even their life can depend upon them to some extent. So whenever you decide to use an instrument, you need to be sure that it's really rigorous. And so here are 5 questions to ask of any supplier or the trainer that's planning on incorporating one of these instruments in their work. If they can't answer them clearly, then is it really ethically or morally right to go ahead and use them? Of course, generally the only people who have access to sufficient data to actually prove the veracity of an instrument or otherwise are the people who've got a vested interest in them in the first place being deemed to be accurate. In other words, usually the publishers of the tests. Incidentally, we will look in more detail at the concepts of validity, of repeatability, reproducibility, of linearity, accuracy and precision when we come to doing some of the work on statistics and numbers later on in the course. So who was Carl Jung? He was a psychiatrist, subsequently trained as a psychoanalyst. He was born in 1875 in Switzerland, and he died in 1961. So he was a contemporary of, but slightly younger than Sigmund Freud. He made a lot of contributions in all sorts of different disciplines, ranging from psychiatry, psychology, and those sort of areas, through anthropology, sociology, teaching, journalism, all sorts of areas. But it was actually his development of the theory of analytical psychology that led to his fame. One of the key axioms of that was that he proposed that there were a small number of archetypes into which all human beings fall. Essentially, in his model, there were 8 such archetypes. They were determined by 3 quite profound factors. The first of these was where we tend to get our energy from. In other words, do we get it by association with other people, in which case we're extroverted, or do we get our energy from within ourselves, in which case we're introverted? The second dimension was how we take in information. Do we take it in by sensing something, in other words, actually receiving it by sight or by hearing or by taste or whatever, or touch, or do we have a perception of it within ourselves? Are we intuitive? The third dimension was how we go about making decisions. Are we somebody who makes our decisions on the basis of logic and thought, or are we somebody who makes our decisions in a more subjective fashion using feelings? None of these has a value associated with them. They're not right or wrong. They are just differences in the way in which people organise their thinking. The fourth dimension wasn't actually created by Carl Jung. It was developed by Elizabeth Briggs Myers and Keirsey when they embellished Jung's original model. They came up with effectively and quite independently a fourth dimension. That was the lifestyle choice of the individual. Is this somebody who relies upon being flexible, being highly pragmatic, very accommodating? In other words, they're somebody who is perceiving what's going on around them and making their choices on the basis of that? Or are they somebody who is quite judgmental, who makes a decision, fixes on it, and will take quite a lot of work to try and get them to change their mind? So that's the fourth dimension, judging and perceiving. So you've got 4 elements: introverted, extroverted, sensing, intuition, thinking, feeling, and judging, perceiving, which moves it from being an 8 archetype model to a 16 archetype model. And that's where the 8 and the 16 come from in most of the tests. I wouldn't mind betting that most of us at some time have taken a Myers-Briggs or a similar instrument over the course of the years. The 16 boxes are very often illustrated with quite graphic titles, some of which are useful, some of which are perhaps less so. This particular one that I've captured here for the slide shows traditionalists, protectors, guides, visionaries, problem solvers, harmonizers, and so on. They're useful summaries to try and capture the essence of the personality that each of those boxes represents. Now, there are some problems that come up with this kind of approach. Apart from anything else, some people seem to, according to the test, sit halfway between 2 forms. So it'll be certain elements of each of those boxes that will apply to them. So to take a simple example, you might have somebody who is an INTJ, which is a visionary in this particular model's terminology, somebody who is quite independent, quite innovative, fairly analytical, can be quite purposeful. They're driven by a vision. They may be sort of very similar to somebody who is an INFJ, the guides of this world. They are people who tend to be devoted, again innovative. They tend to be quite value driven, so idealistic, but they're also very concerned about people, hence the feeling element coming in there, and that means that they can be quite compassionate. So you can see that you could get somebody who can sit across the fence between those 2 types, simply because their score on one scale, the feeling and the judgmental scale tends to be blurred. So we've got some problems, if you like, in interpretation if you get these kinds of mixed results. I'll leave you to do the test, and I've included one last week for you to practice on. See how you get on, and see which of the boxes you fit into, and whether you feel comfortable with it. Once you've done the test, then I suggest you do a Google search for the 4-letter acronym that is supposedly going to describe you. You'll almost certainly find something on Google which will give you loads of descriptions of what you are if you're an INFJ or an ESFP or whatever it might be. Read those descriptions. See what they feel like. See whether they resonate with you. See whether they seem appropriate to you. You might want to check them out with somebody and say, look, I've done this test. This is the kind of thing that it comes up with. Does that describe my personality? Have a look at it and see what you think. The only problem, and I think the thing that we need to bear in mind, is that it does seem maybe a little ambitious that we can fit the entire human race into 16 boxes. That's quite a big ask of any kind of theory. So what do we do with the people that just happen to not fit into it? Who might they be? Carl Jung was Jewish. Sigmund Freud was Jewish. The model tends to use concepts and constructs that are from the Abrahamic faiths. Is that the limit of the population of people that it really applies to? In which case, what about Buddhists? What about Hindus? What about Sikhs? What about atheists? Do all of them fit into this kind of description of populations? If they do, then fine, it's a useful model for businesses and organisations, employers to use to try and find out whether somebody's going to be a good fit with their culture and so on. But if, on the other hand, this model doesn't apply to all of those groups, are we being racist or religionist or whatever you want to describe it as by using a test that isn't actually appropriate to the people that we're trying to recruit? Where do we fit on all of that? These are all really important ethical questions that we need to be making our minds up about as HR professionals for the future. So, lots to think about. This is very much a unit for you to do some reflecting. You need to be thinking about yourself, your personality, about your professional identity, about how you present yourself at work, about what other people might see, and how you might control that, and what elements of it you need to really be much more careful with than perhaps you have in the past. At the same time, you need to be reflecting on the use of these psychometric instruments. Are they effective? Some of them are. Some of them are very good. But have you ever checked them out? Have you found out what the information is that validates them? Lots of work to do. I'll leave it with you. Cheers. Bye.